I was living but not alive.
You were a star athlete, but what happened from that point to take you to a lower point?
Junior year, high school, that's when everything shifted. Went from being one of the expected best players on the team to being bench rider and someone that catastrophically imploded. Baseball was who I was, what I did, what I focused on. Eat, sleep, and breathe baseball back then. And so my entire self-worth and image was tied up in my performance. I was living but not alive.
How did you go about filling that void or finding a new identity? What did you turn to?
I ignored it, but to distract myself to look at something different, I cheated on my girlfriend. And unfortunately, that immediately after, I felt like the biggest piece of shit ever. It sent me even further down in the downward spiral. The focus on pressure and expectation from coaching staff, from players, from outside, and then also the same cycle with focusing on a woman that I was not in a relationship with but desired. It's all external validation. And so when the external validation of getting drafted disappeared, well, what's the next external validation I can go to?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And until that hits, that runs out, and there's an exposure to, hey, maybe there's an inward journey instead of an outward journey, that cycle would have continued playing out in my life.
Welcome, everyone, to the Beyond the Cover podcast. My intent with creating this podcast was to provide a platform where men can speak openly about their journeys with mental health without fear of judgment while doing so. While I, the host, or you, the listener, may not agree with everything or anything that a certain guest says for that matter, my focus is not to decipher what is right or wrong. Rather, it's to gain a better understanding of why somebody thinks and acts the way that they do. And with this understanding, we will begin to make better sense of our own lives and the world around us. So join me as we open the books into these men's journeys and dissect the pages within. Today's guest is Ryan Tomita. Ryan shares with us an incredibly common journey that many athletes experience where they tie up their identities within the sport itself. And what do you do whenever the sport ends? Many athletes struggle. And Ryan today will share with you all how he has been able to better manage that struggle and even potentially overcome it. I can't wait for you all to listen. So without further ado, let's jump right in. Ryan Tomita, welcome to Beyond the Cover.
Thanks, man. Great to be here. I've been looking forward to this.
I have very much been looking forward to this because we have become new friends and very quickly. And I was a little hesitant when I first was going to meet you just because I was being put in contact. And anytime you meet anyone new, you wonder what they're about.
Yep.
You wonder if it's going to be valuable, the interaction that you have with them. And what you have provided has been every bit valuable, not only because of who you are, but because of what you've built. And we're going to dive it deep into that. So on the cover, you are a licensed mortgage broker. You're also in outbound sales, but the true passion and the absolute incredible journey that you have created is you're the founder of Middle Finger Mantras, which I am now a part of proudly. And it's a group that allows men to speak freely about their experiences with mental health.
Mm-hmm.
Since I've joined, we've had some familiar faces, new guys, but I know there's how many now total men are in the group?
On book club, it ranges anywhere from like 8 to 13 guys every week. But, we have probably 80 guys who have attended events and are active within our community at some point or another.
And what I love about it is you have the book clubs where we sit and we chat and we just open up about our vulnerabilities. But you also do all the other guy things, right? I saw you talked about shooting, hiking. Anything that you can think of that men like to do is like you guys are participating in that. You're participating in it.
Yeah.
What ultimately spurred that creation of the mantras? Why did you decide to take that upon your own shoulders?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's twofold. One, I really struggled with transitioning into being an adult after being an athlete. And I really missed that locker room environment.
Mm-hmm.
And when I went to go seek other men's communities for the support and the type of relationships I was looking for, I couldn't find it.
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, well, either I complain about it and I just do nothing and I join a group that I'm not necessarily aligned with, or I create one. And so we did, and brings us to here today. And it's evolved many times, but I'm so thankful that I started it, because it's been a magnet and a central hub for my best friends to find me, instead of me having to go network and find other high quality men.
Yeah. And we are the energy that we attract. And I thought that was super cool how just in a matter of 2 meetings, I feel very connected with these individuals. There's a lot of commonality.
Yeah.
Because we share the same interest in diving deeper into this topic of mental health.
Yeah.
Which often most men shy away from for fear of being seen as weak, or just overly vulnerable. Is that what you're also seeing? Are there any other reasons that you see men shy away from this in particular, that they've shared with you? I mean, since you've had 80 guys come through this, I'm sure you get a lot of feedback on what frightens them with being more vocal.
Yeah, I think we've all had experiences, whether it's with other men or intimate partners and women, where vulnerability has been used against us.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a lot of resistance to that. And unfortunately, we live in a world right now where men are competing against one another, right? And so the last thing I want to do is give you an advantage over myself and have you know a weakness of mine if I don't feel comfortable with you. And I think that's part of the big reason as to why Mantras is different, because we approach that and we create those containers and we initiate those interactions differently. So I would say, yeah, it's mainly just the fear of a pattern that has been realized previously from opening up or being vulnerable.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what somebody's experienced in the past a lot of times does dictate their present day and future actions.
For sure.
We just talked about that last night, actually, about how we have to see an old experience will create the same outcome if we continue to think that because what happened in the past will happen again, where it's like, that's not always the case.
Yep.
It's like if you dated somebody in the past and they hurt you, doesn't mean the next person's going to hurt you. But we're conditioned, our ego is to protect us.
Yep.
And that's why it sets those security parameters, essentially.
That's a great way of putting it. I love that.
I suppose sometimes I say some decently smart things. Ryan, when I reached out to you about joining me on this podcast, I asked you for you to recount a moment in your life where you had faced rock bottom.
Yeah.
And you had mentioned it being involved with the sports realm, which I can absolutely relate to. I want you to take me back to your junior year of high school. You were a star athlete.
Yeah.
But what happened from that point to take you to a lower point?
Yeah. It was funny when you asked me that question. It was like I knew immediately, because it's so imprinted in me and it shaped who I am today. But essentially, I transferred to Horizon High School, which is somewhat of a nationally recognized high school for baseball. Arizona is a hotbed for baseball, but Horizon's definitely a powerhouse in Arizona. And so when I transferred from Brophy, I had to sit out my sophomore year. And so I was brought onto the varsity team, practiced with them, was on the bench, and because I wasn't allowed to play because of the transfer rules. And essentially in the off season of my sophomore year, I really started making some noise and getting some attention. And when it came time to junior year, high school, that's when everything shifted. The scout ball Ryan, the summer travel baseball team Ryan, that was playing with wood bat, was not the same Ryan that was in front of a high school playing with aluminum bat. And I essentially, in the span of, I want to say a week, maybe 2 weeks, went from being one of the expected best players on the team to being a bench rider and someone that catastrophically imploded. And that really sent me down my first of 3, dark nights of the soul with baseball. And one where my family was pretty worried about me. I didn't know how to react, and I just handled it the best way that I could.
I want you to talk to me about those emotions as you weren't living up to those expectations that you had created in your head.
Yeah.
And you talk about your family being worried about you. How were you coping at the time?
Yeah, dude, that's such a good question. I would have to reflect on the specific emotions that were coming up for me, because I find that there's two different paths for handling trauma.
Okay.
And one of the more common ways, and the ways that I handled it, was I shut down, because the uncomfortable emotions were so uncomfortable that I didn't know how to regulate. I didn't know how to handle those. And so the solution was, well, if I just don't feel anything, then I won't feel pain. And so I think in my parents' eyes, because I continued to show up every day, because I still worked hard, because I took care of grades, because I was still a good brother, like that was all, I was okay, and I was working through that. But in reality, like I was living but not alive, and that carried on until my late 20s. I would call myself stoic, right? I literally have a picture of me walking across home plate, tapping helmets after a home run, just fucking blank, no emotion. And part of that's because in baseball, we're taught, hey, like we're not trying to ride the roller coaster of emotions. Like baseball is a game of failure. And so me being black and white, I took that literally, and I was like, okay, cool, like no emotion, got it. And yeah, it's I would say that for sure, I know that there was a lot of sleepless nights. There was a lot of frustration. There was a lot of mental gymnastics trying to figure out, what can I do? How can I do this? All those kinds of things. And then I also recall not being a great teammate after that all transpired. I once again, like I still showed up. I was still picking other team signs. I was still adding value from the bench, but my energy was so fucking toxic. I was so mad at everyone and everything. As much as you can be as a stoic individual.
Where do you think that anger was coming from? I mean, oftentimes I think when people feel a certain emotion, it can be because of a projection of what they feel internally. So while you were angry at others, it was probably more so that it could have been you were angry with yourself.
100%.
I guess I don't know if we touched on it necessarily, but you said that you started kind of going through having something that you'd call like the yips. Do you know what caused that? I mean, was it just the fear of the expectation that you had to live up to, and that you started just overthinking it, or did you just happen to find yourself in a position where you're like, wait, I'm not playing as well as I thought. I don't know how I got here.
Yeah, I think we're going to start getting into the psychology or like the self-improvement stuff now, which is my internal thermostat wasn't set to the level that I was at. And so I reverted back to normal.
Okay.
Right. When I started to exceed my own self-image, things transpired to prove myself right, that my beliefs were correct. And so every time that I started to ascend or improve, I quickly retracted because things made me uncomfortable. It made me uncomfortable that Notre Dame showed up to one of my games in high school and I got a bunch of snarky comments from my teammates about like, oh, don't strike out. Like, don't be, don't try to be someone different now that Notre Dame's in the stands. And so being someone that, valued friendships and wanted to fit in, that made me uncomfortable. Same thing with, later on in my career after I, opened up the season with a 2 home run game and I come back to school and everyone's telling me like, hey, great job. And I'm like, dude, I'm uncomfortable. Right. So Ed Milet talks about the internal thermostat. There's multiple different terminologies or ways to phrase it, but yeah, it was the image that I had of myself was less than the performance that I was having. And so when it came time to like truly step into that version of self, there was so much fear of failure that is exactly what transpired.
Yeah. Gosh, yeah. Fear of failure is a major, major thing that plagues many people from even taking action. There's the analysis paralysis that people sometimes they weigh all their options and say, yes, this is the biggest opportunity for me, but what happens if I don't make it? And oftentimes that fear alone will be enough to stop us or just take us out of our balanced state of mind.
Yeah.
So you're the talk of the town. Everyone's expecting a lot of things out of you or to be one of the best players. You start to expect that because you hear it. So it starts to become your reality. And then you start to find yourself in a place where you're not living up to that expectation, both internal and externally. take me through then the next steps, because you mentioned that that wasn't the only time that you had faced that, rock bottom moment. So where do you go from there then?
Yeah, so continue to be a role player and serve the team the best that I can. My junior year, we make it to the state semifinals and end up losing, but come off the bench as a defensive player, pinch hit every once in a while, but effectively go from being, someone that was going to be heavily relied upon for production to someone that is licking his wounds for the entire season. Continue working, putting my time in, because growing up, that was my cure all. I just work harder. So I had a tunnel in my backyard. I was blessed and had the privilege of having that. So I was in there consistently. I was improving my size. I was training at Athletes Performance Institute, or Exos, which you may be familiar with.
Yeah.
And so I had all the state of the art support, and continue to play in the off season with the Angel Scout team in town, and get to the senior year and open up hot out of the gate. And that was great. And I recall, having a little bit of time in that, gaining attention again, right? Because after my junior year of catastrophic failure, every single college that I was talking to was like, wrote me off, on to the next guy. And then throughout my senior year, I started to gain some attention again. And it really came down to me being a recruited walk-on to U of A, getting I think it was 60 or 70% scholarship to Grand Canyon University, or going to Paradise Valley Community College. And that was, now that we're talking about this, the fear of making a decision in that state, because I didn't know what to do. I tried leaning on my parents. My parents were wise enough to not make the decision for me. And I ultimately made the decision to go to GCU because they were giving me money. And I was like, they're going to be more loyal to me than if I walk on to U of A and then they treat me however they want to. So I go to GCU, and one of the first day, first off, get to campus early because I live 30 minutes away, and I'm training, working my ass off in the off season, preparing to come into the fall season, and all the coaches are praising me, saying how mentally mature I was, how hard I work, how good I'm going to be. They set me up to live with 2 juniors and a sophomore, while all the other freshmen were with other freshmen, because I was more mature, and so that started really getting to me. And first day of practice, Coach Andy Stankiewicz comes in and goes, "All right, guys, you're all here now. Everyone's on the same playing field. Don't give a shit if we gave you money or not. Like, all that was to get you here." And I'm like, sick. And then we started playing, and we started practicing, and the ball's just a half a second faster. Everyone's a step quicker. Everyone's a little bit stronger. And the game was just too fast for me. And that I really struggled, because I went from junior year failure, senior year, to being a captain, being a highly recruited freshman in GCU, and had high expectations. And then I get there and I go, whoa, I'm a step behind. And that was really, really difficult for me to handle mentally. And it led to me, once again, working hard, but being toxic energetically, being an excuse maker, trying to justify why, he likes this guy more than me, X, Y, and Z, every reason I could to avoid the fact of looking at myself and saying, like, my beliefs and my thoughts are the reason why all this is happening. So freshman year was the classic really talented athlete that comes in and has to play a role of a freshman, and getting, I think I still got like 30 at bats, which is really good for a freshman at a large, well-recognized baseball program. But that wasn't enough for me. And so I ended up getting cut after that year, and my baseball career continued, went to Gateway Community College, and then cycle repeated once I went to my next 4-year.
So the cycle repeated in that you were cut. Now the expectations felt lower. Everyone's like, okay, he's he's not what maybe we thought he'd be. You felt that, but then it sounds like whenever the expectations from the outside seemingly lowered, it allowed you to almost breathe and say, okay, now because there's no expectations, I can basically fail without any repercussions to some degrees. Would you say that that's because it sounds that for your rebound is essentially you're saying that you had high expectations that put you in a tough spot where you felt like you couldn't perform to your highest ability.
Yeah.
You come crashing down. And then once now the expectations are low, now you can thrive again.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it was discomfort on both ends,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it's discomfort from me seeing myself better than the production that I was. And so when there's no expectations, I don't like that. And I want to exceed those. And then when there's high expectations, I feel so much pressure and fear that I'm not gonna be able to meet them.
Yeah.
So sophomore year, or I guess freshman summer, I go up to Oneonta, New York in the NYCBL and have a fantastic summer. As far as like a glove at shortstop, I was once again the talk of the town. Offensively, I struggled a little bit, but I really ascended back to one of the key players on the team, and that gave me a confidence boost. Came back to Gateway Community College and had a mediocre year, honestly, defensively and offensively. But because of that time I spent in New York, I bonded with our ace for Oneonta, the Outlaws, and he was the ace at University of North Georgia. So after I played with Brandon, Brandon's the one that went to his head coach saying, hey, you're looking for a shortstop? I got your guy. I played with entire summer with him. The dude's a glove. And so have an average year at community college, but luckily get picked up by a D2 program out in Georgia and come in, and I am the next coming, right? Coach is praising me. He's saying that he'd let me date his daughter. I'm a captain. I'm being referenced as a specific type of player to one of my idols and mentors at the time, one of our assistant coaches, his sons. I just remember feeling the amount of pressure that I had going into spring, because in the fall I was killing it. And so as the spring comes, I open up the season starting shortstop, boot my first ground ball, no worries, okay, like he's still a glove. And then in practice end up short, or like almost two hopping the first baseman because I can't throw the ball across the diamond. And I remember specifically it was a tailor-made ground ball, 2 steps to my left. I grab it, I fear missing the first baseman as I'm cocking back, and I let it go passively, and it fucking just goes, and the first baseman misses it. I'm like, fuck. I just really don't want another ground ball. Very next pitch, same exact play, same exact outcome. Throw it 8 feet short. And that led to me no longer starting as a shortstop. I was still DH, which was awesome for a couple series. And then I was on the bench, picking up, stealing signs and trying to help out the team win as best as we could. But yeah, it was another failing to meet expectations and a fantastic learning lesson for me later on in life.
Well, something I want to highlight is that the stakes are very high when you start playing at the levels beyond high school. To your point, I mean, you short hopped 2, balls that came your way, and it's like to the bench you go. Mm-hmm. But I've seen that. I when I was with the Seahawks, I had a roommate, and he was super fast, and they gave him a shot to be a punt returner. Mm. He fumbles the first punt came his way that in the game, and they cut him the next day.
Yep.
So I do want to highlight that is what happens when you get to a higher level. Is they do expect as close to perfection, and that having that over you is very, very hard to. You feel like you have to play as close to perfect as possible, otherwise you're 1 drop pass or 1 drop ball away from riding the pine. So after what you just explained, was that it then? Was that the end of your career, as baseball career as you saw it?
No, I had a similar story as my senior year in high school, where I come out hot out of the gates, and and then slowly degrade back to the image that I had of myself. I think you touched on something that's really important there, which is the amount of pressure and the reality of every single play counts at that level.
Mm-hmm.
And so that in of itself is enough pressure. But on top of that, the pressure that I had on myself, because that was my self-worth and that was my identity, was even more so.
Baseball, you're saying?
Yeah, baseball. Baseball was who I was, what I did, what I focused on. I eat, sleep, and breathe baseball back then. And so my entire self-worth and image was tied up in my performance. And so on top of the pressure of, okay, like it's very competitive. There's a shortstop that wants to take my place. Every single play matters. People's incomes and livelihoods are dictated by the performance of the team. It's just a lot of pressure.
You bring up something that is extremely common, which is collegiate and professional athletes that build their identity around the sport. And I'm curious on your opinion. Do you think that there's a healthy way to do that? The reason why I ask is because a lot of athletes, inevitably sports end. You might have a 9-year career in the league, good for you, or you might have 2 months like I did in the league.
Yeah.
The reality is there's an end point, and most athletes don't get to choose when that end point is.
Yeah.
Either their body fails on them, they get cut, and that is where all of a sudden, when you wrap your identity up in something that abruptly ends, you now ask yourself, well, who am I?
Yeah.
I wasn't anticipating losing this part of me so quickly. So now I have to go straight into, well, how do I fill this void? So my first question to you is, do you feel like there's a way to strike a healthy balance with making a sport your identity? Or do you feel that it's a dangerous thing to allow yourself to attach to?
Yeah, dude, that's a tough question, but a really good one. I think it's a fine line. I don't think it's a yes or no. I think it's a balance of how much you're invested into it, because I think the ego and the identity is beneficial. And there's a reason why Derek Jeter was one of the best baseball players ever. And there's a reason why Michael Jordan was better than everyone else. And so it definitely catalyzes and elevates performance to a certain extent. But it's also something that's extremely fragile. And we see this even with people who are Hall of Famers, right? When they exit the game, they don't know what to do with themselves, right? So it comes to every athlete at some point in time, I feel like. But the attachment to it and the hyperfixation on performance, as that is directly correlated to how worthy I am or how valuable I am or who I am, is a really slippery slope. Because when it's going good, it can go really good. When it goes bad, it's devastating. And I mean, like, where were you at in that process as far as, your image being tied up in that?
Yeah, I mean, I remember I got cut from the Seahawks, but I knew it was coming because it was the final preseason game and I had incredibly talented athletes ahead of me. I knew I was going to have to do something absolutely phenomenal in the final preseason game versus the Raiders, and I didn't. And so I was waiting on that phone call the next morning, and it came. They let me sleep in. What I was surprised about, I woke up at like 8 o'clock or whatever. And I'm like, why is my phone hasn't rang yet? But I just knew deep down, I'm like, there's no way. Like, this is the second best tight end group in the nation, or outside of like the Patriots, I think had a better tight end group, but it was the Seahawks are right up there.
Yeah.
And so yeah, when I got cut, it was abrupt, but I kind of knew it was coming. And then I'll never forget, I had probably 50 people that were texting me the day before when I was still on in the NFL. Second I got cut, I had maybe 3 people that continued to text me, because most of those people were just there to talk to the guy that was in the NFL. And that was hard, because now all of a sudden, I mean, it was basically them screaming at me, you no longer are in the NFL. You are no longer an NFL athlete.
Yeah.
So therefore you can't call yourself that anymore. So I said, okay, if I can't call myself that, then what am I now? I've played this sport since 7th grade, since 12 years old. I'm 23 now.
Yeah.
So then I went on a journey to try to fill that void of, okay, well, what's my identity going to become? So I want to ask you, you had that void, baseball ends. How did you go about filling that void or finding a new identity? What did you turn to?
I ignored the void. Yeah, no, I honestly didn't even uncover that until October of last year with the help of some wonderful friends of mine, Aaron Velke and Marty Noki. Went on a retreat, and it was a mindfulness retreat, improving life. And the narrative that I had around that entire experience was that I walked away because baseball is a small world, right? Football, once you get to that level, like it's a pretty small world. And I was fortunate to have connections to professional Major League Baseball. And so if I really wanted to go pursue it, I could have gone and done free agent route and got a cup of coffee and a chance to go play. But with the frustration that I had with the amount of time and energy that I put into it and with where I was at, and also seeing the guys that were getting popped and where they were at, I was like, I justified it to myself saying, yeah, dude, like I could go spend the next 6 years of my life living out of a van in a Motel 6 playing minor league ball, but like I'm not good enough to get on TV. And so I walked away from the game. But the narrative that I had in my mind was the game walked away from me. It told me I wasn't good enough. Therefore, I didn't need to. Mm-hmm. And so that void was just pushed away. Actually, no, you know what I did? And so I ignored it. But to distract myself to look at something different, I cheated on my girlfriend. That's what I did. Yeah. And so until that retreat in October of last year, I thought that I had moved past baseball. I was like, I don't think about baseball. I don't play baseball. I don't talk about baseball. I've moved on to being an entrepreneur, a businessman, a finance guy, X, Y, and Z. And then it really came to light that it was like, no, like you have not completed the 5 stages of grieving. You're in denial. And I was like, I got chills. And I was like, that feels true. Because I was looking for a reason why I was stuck. I was like, I'm not creating the life I want to live. I'm trying hard. Nothing's changing. And when that happened, it was really an aha wake up moment where it was like, there's a lot of hatred, self-hatred in that entire experience. And there was trapped energy or an emotional pattern that hadn't come to full completion. So I was essentially living the same day, nervous system wise, over and over again, of me not getting popped. Popped is an acronym or like a slang for getting drafted.
Okay.
And then directing my attention towards a different female.
So can you explain a little bit? You mentioned that you had cheated on your girlfriend at the time. What was the mindset behind that? Was, you felt so baseball doesn't go the way that you want. And then what was cheat? I guess if you can explain why cheating was the avenue that you went. So talk to me about why that made sense to do that.
I'm not drafted, so I'm not good enough. I'm not worthy. I'm not deserving. I meet a girl that I still to this day would consider top 3 best looking women I've ever seen in my life. And I played with fire. For the first 5-6 times we hung out, it was very platonic, very healthy boundary setting. Although I would not suggest that I'd be hanging out with someone like that while being in a exclusive relationship. Mm-hmm. But it was feeling the void, refusing to look at it. And so if I can go feel good by connecting with another woman that I deeply desire, maybe that'll make me feel better. And unfortunately that immediately after I felt like the biggest piece of shit ever. So it was, it sent me even further down in the downward spiral.
Yeah. I think you were looking for something that could instantly gratify you.
Cheap dopamine,
which is what a lot of people do turn to in times of where they lack self-worth and they feel they're not good enough. They go to avenues. People use comfort foods. That'll give you a dopamine hit. Sex will give you a dopamine hit. If you're, there's healthier ways that, can spike dopamine, like working out and doing that. But for some people, gambling, getting a quick hit, getting a quick win.
Yep.
So I'm glad that you explained that, because, somebody might say, well, why, if you already felt bad enough, why would you go and do something that's going to make you feel worse? It's like, well, because on the surface, I thought that it would just make me feel better and desirable, because you said I didn't feel good enough. So then you see this woman that
Yeah.
you're like, I can't believe she's even giving me attention.
Yeah.
For real though. Yeah. And it's very real.
Yeah.
That's where when somebody lacks self-love and self-worth and they get attention from someone that they feel is above them, out of their league, they think this is going to, I can't believe this, but if they want me, I must be good enough. So then they continue to play with the fire until they cross a boundary and realize, I never actually wanted to do that.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to feel good enough for just a moment.
Yeah. I think you just touched on something that connected for me too. And I love talking about this because like clearly it's still something I'm working through. The focus on pressure and expectation from coaching staff, from players, from outside, and then also the same cycle with focusing on a woman that I was not in a relationship with but desired. It's all external validation.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
Like I not once in my life up until I was like 27 did I ever go inward. Did I ever look intrinsically for worth, value, deservingness? It was all justified and validated from external. Right? And so when the external validation of getting drafted disappeared, well, what's the next external validation I can go to?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And until that hits, that runs out, and there's an exposure to, hey, maybe there's an inward journey instead of an outward journey, that cycle would have continued playing out in my life.
Yeah. And I think I really commend you for the honesty. I can also be vulnerable here and say that after I got cut from football, I went to medical device sales, and I told people I was an orthopedic medical device sales rep in the trauma and joint reconstructive division. It was a mouthful. But I was like, oh, I'm working with surgeons.
Sounds
right?
nice, baby.
Sounds incredible.
Yeah.
I was getting a ton of external validation. Clayton's working with surgeons.
Yeah.
What else did I do though? I started playing the field. I was a player. I was hooking up with as many women as I could, because I was getting that instant gratification of that dopamine release.
Yep.
And it made me feel that, wow, if all these women want me, then I must be really highly valued.
Yep.
But it always felt empty. They only wanted me for a night.
Yeah.
Or just maybe there was nothing more than just that. I didn't see anything more, but it was like my worth was tied up. And if this woman, if enough women sleep with me, then maybe I'll feel like I'm good enough.
Yeah.
It's just something often that we don't talk about, because I think, we feel ashamed. I mean, it's frowned upon to, oh, you've been with how many people? And so it's really hard to be vulnerable when you're, and not to make an excuse, but it's like, I mean, that's a way to go about trying to find validation, is just, today, I don't feel good enough. So what's going to bring validation by the end of the day?
Yeah.
That's going to make me be able to at least balance out, or just for a split second can just counteract this feeling of insufficiency.
Yeah.
So within the last year, it sounds like you said you started to go on this journey to inwardly. Mm-hmm. You had talked about this, and I don't fully understand it yet. So I want you to explain to me and the audience that's listening that there are two different levels of masculinity. There's masculinity 1.0 and then masculinity 2.0.
Yeah.
Can you, because I don't really know the difference between them.
Yeah.
Can you tell me what's masculinity 1.0 and then what's 2.0, and how do you go from one to the next?
Yeah, it's something that we kind of coined. So it's like, it's not something that's widely talked about. It's something that we use to describe the shift that we're making as men.
And this is, you're saying we as in middle finger mantras.
Middle finger mantras in the
Yes.
community and the friends group and the men that I've aligned myself with to do life with. And so I describe masculinity 1.0 as the patriarchy. It is the tough love, old fashioned approach to being a man. Men don't cry. Men don't talk about their feelings. Stop being a pussy. Just try harder. Just fucking do it. Stop making excuses. My win is your loss. My loss is your gain. Another way of saying that is it's constantly a big dick swinging contest. Mm-hmm. You run into men that have to be the alpha in every single group, and they want a posse to elevate them and make them look more important. And it's that same external validation cycle. And so masculinity 1.0 is the way that men have conducted themselves, have been taught on how to operate and navigate through life. And masculinity 2.0 is the shift towards a co-op or collaboration, right? This is also stepping into the realm of we're ascending in consciousness. So your win is completely independent from my experience. You can have everything that you want, and I can have everything that I want. It also helps to be able to have conscious conversation, to be able to understand that we are human beings. We're vessels of energy that do require the movement and release of energy in order to not blow up. Right. So I mentioned that for me and my trauma with baseball, I shut down. The flip side of that is men don't know how to regulate, and they get a really, really short fuse, and their ego's so strong that they just lash out. If their ego's attacked, they raise their voice, they attack verbally, sometimes physically, right? So those are the actions. I'm kind of getting off track here, but masculinity 2.0 is a shift towards operating in a way in which there's respect, there's love, and there's harmony between me and everyone else. And I don't know if I'm explaining that perfectly well. So
I think so. I mean, to me, what you said is masculinity 1.0 is mainly about the I. It's the self. It's external validation. So what can you all do for me? I think, and masculinity 2.0 is what can I do for you, and what can we do synergistically?
Yes.
To grow and flourish. Masculinity 1.0 would be like a scarcity mindset. What's mine is mine.
Yep.
And I'm not going to allow you to take that.
Yep.
I find a lot of times that, with masculinity 2.0, with what you described, that's more of a surplus mindset. What's on my plate's on my plate, but I'll give you what's on my plate because I'll just go hunt for more.
Yeah.
And what's yours is yours.
Yeah.
And you can't take from me unless, because what's meant for me is always meant for me.
Yeah.
So it's not fear-based. I think you have more fear-based in masculinity 1.0 with what you're describing.
100%.
Where the people are operating from a place of, how are people going to view me? I need to present a certain way. I need to be the biggest, strongest guy in the room.
Yeah.
That and basically I'm competing against these other men for what? Well, for maybe a job role, maybe for a woman, but this is a matter of how I win is by basically beating you. Whereas it's more of a team oriented approach.
That's a really good way of putting it. I think that synopsis was fantastic. And I'd say one of the biggest shifts from 1.0 to 2.0 is 1.0 also is the every man for himself. It's a dog eat dog world. Yeah. And 2.0 is brotherhood is like the backbone of a really incredible experience. And creating life that we want. It's a team thing. It's a community thing versus it's me against the world.
Yeah. And also something that, well, actually, I want to ask you this. With baseball, you've went on this journey, you said in the last year, to reflect within and start doing this deep dive. I saw on your LinkedIn, you had talked about books that you read recently, and it was a long list of probably 50 to 100 books. Yeah. You're doing a very extreme deep dive. On the topic of baseball, what stage of grief do you currently feel that you're in? And can you really quickly, can you tell us what the 5 stages of grief are, just really quickly?
Yeah, I'd have to recall them.
I have actually written in here.
So let's see if I can nail it.
Okay.
Anger.
Yes.
Denial. Bargaining.
Yes.
Acceptance and sadness.
Yeah. Depression, sadness.
Depression.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And so you actually, I talked about this in a previous podcast with one of my friends about the 5 stages of grief as we walked through what he had experienced. But what brought me, and what the reason why I wrote it down was because of our coffee shop conversation. Yeah. So you have, and they can be in different orders. They don't have to be in order, but you have denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. Yeah. You had mentioned previously with your story that you've had a lot of anger. Yeah. And then you went through points of depression. Yeah. Are you at full acceptance currently?
I want to say yes.
Okay.
And also with just like my nervous system response when I'm talking about it, there's still some charge there.
Okay.
And so I'd say I'm shifting probably from denial or bargaining into acceptance.
Okay. What do you think it's going to take to get to full acceptance? Just gut feeling right now. Is there one?
Forgiveness,
What do you want to forgive?
grace. The Ryan that was his own toughest critic and still is. It's I'm getting the chills again. But yeah, it's a tough one to forgive ourselves for the things that we did in our lives that really meant a lot and that we're not proud of, you know? Like I still feel really bad about cheating on my girlfriend, especially with the type of relationship that we had. And I think I've definitely processed those and moved through those to the best of my abilities. But even talking about it, like there's still something there. So I don't know if it's subconscious or if it's, journaling on it more. But I've done work, and I think just from the standpoint of um, the work that's been done, because you saw that list, which was funny because that was only the year after I graduated college. I went on a voracious reading cycle, and so those are really only the books I read since 2017. But the path that I went down is something that we would say, like the analogy is, I didn't feel good enough, and so if I'm a tree, I said I'm not good enough, so I need to grow. And so I just continue to focus on the canopy and get the canopy bigger and greener and more lush. And it wasn't until October that I go, my tree's falling over. It's top heavy. The root structure's nowhere to be found. It's still that of a sapling.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was really when the journey inward happened, because everything up until then was, well, I'll just do more. I'll just improve skills. I'll just improve the skill set, instead of looking internally at the shadow and my ego and all the things that are truly when the journey starts.
Well, and also I love the analogy of the tree, because I'll build the canopy that what everyone can see. I'll make it larger,
100%,
more
dude.
leaves, just make it the most impressive tree you've ever seen.
Yeah.
Because why would I work on the roots? People don't see them anyways.
Yep.
But that's what's happening below the surface, and that's going within. And I love that, because that's not often seen until you make a major switch, and then they notice it. But it's working on the roots takes time, and it's a lot of effort, and it feels like where's the affirmations? People don't see it. You're doing it all internally.
Yep.
Like, is this worth it? It ultimately is, as you know. If I'm just curious, if there was a young Ryan sitting in front of you right now, is there anything that comes up top of mind that you'd want to say to him?
It truly is a mind game, and you are good enough, and you will be okay. But yeah, I said earlier, like, it was the experience that helped me later on in my life, because unless I had those baseball experiences, I would have never had the emotional charge and the pain to actually start that inward journey. And through that, I've come to realize that me laying in bed, fearing missing the first baseman when I was at North Georgia, or beating myself up and replaying me being thrown out at first base on a pop fly in high school, like those thoughts, the intrusive thoughts that I had were just being manifested, right? And I love my parents. They've done a fantastic job. And I was raised in a household where there was a lot of pessimism. There was a lot of negativity.
Mm.
And so, if I were to give myself like practical advice, it's like, hey, dude, start looking at the bright side of life and like take care of, as Marshawn Lynch would say, like take care of your mentals, right? But from like a just pure standpoint of like supporting myself and loving myself on the journey, it's like, you are good enough and you will be fine. Like it's just baseball. It's just baseball. And to you, you don't understand what that means, but like you will eventually. It's just a game, bro. There's plenty of other things in life that are more meaningful and will lead to more fulfillment.
How does somebody get to a place where they can begin to accept a statement like that being made to them? Because I remember when I was younger, I had people tell me, in the grand scheme of things, there's plenty of other girls out there. Yeah, she dumped you, but that's just one.
Yeah.
Like you'll look back at this day and, it won't even matter anymore. And on one front, there's truth to that because eventually life goes on. Then you realize that these really tough, challenging moments built you into who you are today.
Yeah.
But on the other front, it also can invalidate what you're currently going through. So what is the right way to, or get somebody to start to see that for what it is, where it's like, hey, I want to tell you, like, focus on this, understand that it will get better, understand that it is just a sport. But likely that, I remember when I was young and I reciprocated, and when someone said that to me, it's not a big deal. It's like, but it is.
It just pisses you off more.
Yeah.
It's like, what are you talking about? Yeah. That's a fantastic question. I'm just like racking my mind of what I would have said 5 years ago versus what I would say today. And this isn't going to be a very popular answer, but I'm not sure that anything that you say will make a difference.
No, I love that. As I heard you say what you would want to say to your younger self, and when I'm always curious what people will say when they go, okay, what would I say? But the reality is I don't think there was anything that could have been said to me.
No. If I'm thinking about it from a true facilitation standpoint, as we've been focusing a lot within mantras in the men's group, like foundation number one is you have to meet someone where they're at. Mm-hmm. Right. So if I'm in distress and I'm obsessed over failure in baseball and I say, hey man, it's not a big deal. Like it's just a game. Like I'm not meeting that person in the valley of despair and in the guilt, shame, and depression that they're in. Mm-hmm. And so the message won't land. Mm-hmm. And I'm a big believer in empowerment and leading someone to their own decision rather than making that for them. And so that's why I say, like, I'm not sure there's anything that can be said. If there's a 16-year-old kid that's watching this, that is a star athlete and he's had ups and downs and he's in a stage right now where he's, struggling, it's truly something that you have to experience. And then in retrospect, you look back and go like, everything that they said to me was so accurate. But like, it just doesn't land. And we talked about that yesterday in book club, where it's like, dude, these things that we're talking about, we've heard our entire lives. Mm-hmm. It's just, we are in a different state and able to receive it because we've evolved and because we've had those experiences. But trying to tell someone in their first, my dad told me that after my first love broke up with me, he's like, dude, don't worry about it. Like it wasn't plenty of fish in the sea, but something along those lines. And I was like, you don't know what the fuck you're talking about. This girl's amazing.
Yeah.
I just lost the love of my life.
Yeah.
Right. And then a year later, I'm like, wow. Okay. Noted. And so I think there's more growth through pain than anything else.
Absolutely.
And the valley of despair has to be experienced, I think, for people to make that shift. Mm-hmm. Life is too easy to let's not take that out of context. Life is made easy for us to the point where why would anyone want to go and take the path of most resistance?
Yeah.
Until life is so miserable that there is no other option, I have to switch an approach. Like there's so much dopamine, everything's quick. There's plenty of external validation. It's a pretty simple, breezy life until it all runs out. And then you go, what do I do now?
Yeah, in today's society, the convenience of having technology that can basically do everything for us. You don't have to go drive to the bookstore anymore, the library to read something. It's just, you just Google it very quickly. It pops up on your phone in 0.5 seconds. Yeah. You look at it, you move on. Everything is so fast and all the dopamine hits we get by being on social media. And I think truly we have a lot of people that are just stagnant mm-hmm. and going through the motions because they're getting these dopamine hits, but ultimately what's going to create change is when the pain of staying the same becomes greater than the pain of change itself.
Exactly.
And to also just put a bow tie on this or a ribbon on it. I agree with you that I think really when it comes down to it, if there's somebody in a similar position to what you were in as an athlete, somebody that wants to help that individual that sees them going through it, I think the best thing that you can do is listen to them, be an attentive listener, see them, hear them, meet them where they're at. They're not looking for you to give them a solution and answer to the question, more so than they just need to let it out, how they feel. And ultimately, we can become really great question askers. I think that's what's awesome about therapy. It's guided mindfulness is what I found it to be.
That's a good way of putting it.
And that's where therapy is empowering, because you give yourself the answers. There's just someone that's asking you the questions, and ultimately where you take it, they probably don't even know where you're going to take it themselves.
Yeah.
But there's no more powerful of an answer than the one that you create for yourself, because that's the one that you're going to believe, not what somebody 100%. Else feeds you.
Yeah.
So I think it's so important for us as individuals that want to help people out that are in these ruts, is to focus on not what we say to them, but how good of a listener we are.
It's beautiful. Yeah. Honor someone in their process.
I love that.
You can't change it for them. Yeah. And like exactly what you said, I hope I say this correctly, but like giving someone an answer is something along the lines of convincing someone against their will is of the same opinion still. Like it doesn't really land, right? Like telling someone the answer is way different than having that person come up with the answer themselves.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So yeah, I love that.
And that's why I love with the middle finger mantras. So you made a comment even yesterday at our session that you want to foster challenging narratives. Yeah. You're like, hey, if you don't believe this, say something.
Yeah.
Because the reality is that there is no one way to go about a mental health journey. As much as we would love to say this is the path that you got to go on, what works for you doesn't work for me, and vice versa. And so what advice would you give to somebody that hears you speak today and then says, okay, I was also in a rut. I'm in a rut currently. What's the first step that they should take? Or, well, again, I guess everyone differs, but what are a few steps that you feel that somebody can take to start to get a better grasp and start climbing their way out of that rock bottom?
Yeah, I think there's like educational stuff that I could give as far as like mindfulness and self-help, which, like those are helpful. I think it's more of stopping the detrimental or we'll call it toxic behavior.
Okay.
So, and this is something that we identified within mantras and throughout my baseball career, reflecting back on it, which is when times get tough and adversity hits men, there's a knee-jerk reaction to go seek isolation. I don't know why. It's different for every person. For me, it was shame and guilt and loathing my own sorrow. But regardless of the reason for it, it happens all the time. And in my personal experience and observing it in other men, believe that just perpetuates the downward spiral. And so I think a brotherhood and men that you can connect with on a deeper level is one of the most therapeutic and healing aspects or things that you can do when you're at that level in life. Now, with that being said, it's also difficult to find men who can hold space and that can ask thoughtful, open-ended questions and that can honor you in your process, because most men are just wanting to provide solutions, which I understand, but so it's difficult because mantras is unique and it's and the guys that have experienced it get it. And I wish that we could have a group of mantras all over the world so that men had a place to go and seek asylum and like truly feel supported. But nevertheless, it's worthy of attempting too. And the level of support will vary, but so that would be number one.
Awesome. Yeah. Support's critical.
Number two, I would say to meet someone where they're at and to also acknowledge where they're at. I'd say you are 100% justified in the way that you feel. You should, and you do, and I can see it. And feelings are not logical. They are a byproduct of chemicals in our bodies. And so for me, after connection with men and finding support, I would say that the way that you feel as saying, let me back up. The way that you feel is justified. There is a tendency for men to feel shame and guilt for the way that they feel. Suicide is the most applicable one. Life is so bad right now, I'm thinking about ending it all. And I go, great, you should feel that way. And you do feel that way. Now, the way out of that thought and the way out of the valley of despair or the rock bottom is to acknowledge and give ourselves grace for having that feeling, because as we said yesterday, we are not our thoughts. We are the observer of our thoughts. And for me, when I had my multiple suicidal, I'm not going to call them episodes because I never tried to, but moments of contemplating, the thoughts of why the fuck am I thinking this? What is wrong with me? I can't the most the self-talk just turns more negative. The more negative our emotions turn. Yeah. And instead of acknowledging and being like, okay, let's just call it for what it is. It's a viable solution. Do I want you to do that? Do I suggest you do that? Absolutely not. But in order for us to get out of that, I think we also have to meet ourselves where we're at. Yeah. Right. And I think why the fuck am I thinking that is not truly meeting ourselves. It's kind of that other voice coming in and saying, there's plenty of fish in the sea. Yeah. So I think those would be the two things is like, you're justified in the way that you're feeling. Understand that this is part of your journey and your process. And there's nothing wrong with the emotions that you're feeling or the thoughts that you're having. And other ones to go find a brotherhood and find men that can truly hold space for you. And be friends. And there's guys in the group that have come to mantras because they're looking for a break away from their own thoughts. And it's like, cool, let's go roll jujitsu. Let's go shoot some guns. Let's go camping. Just the presence of someone who cares is really, really helpful and healthy and therapeutic.
1000%. I think community is the best thing that you can find because we're social creatures. I mean, that's how it's hardwired in our DNA. That's how we keep a species alive. If we were all loners, then we wouldn't procreate even, and that would be the end of the world. Right. So it used to be necessary for survival, back in tribal times or with the cavemen, and they had to have, to fight off the animals, these predators, they had to band together and they protected each other as a village. And so that hardwiring is still in us. For sure. We feel that it's essential for survival to be liked. Yeah. At least that's the way that I was told, and it made sense to me. And so, having that community makes you feel less alone, gives you hope. You have these conversations like we did today, and maybe you hear something in an hour conversation that just is just what you needed to hear for that fifth time finally, because the previous 4 times it didn't resonate, but that fifth time you're in that stage of your life where it does. Yeah. And I think that's where the educational portion or just having the conversations is so critical. Yeah. Because I can't tell you how many times on the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th time I heard something, that's when the switch flipped. But in order to hear something 8 times, you have to seek that conversation. For sure. And so it's important to take those actions in the first place. Put yourself out there, be guarded. Not everybody that you talk to is going to reciprocate in a positive manner. But if you can find something like the mantras, an organization similar to that, you're going to be in a really great spot as you start to build that and realize that, wait, I have hope because I'm not alone in this. Yeah. And it's totally normal to have suicidal ideation. For sure. It used to be talking to these mental health institutes. They said, we don't talk about it because we don't want to give them the idea. Now they are encouraging the acknowledgement of it because it's normal. It is. Because having that, like you said, it is a solution. It's not the right one, but it's totally normal. A lot of us experience it. And I used to think when I had it that I was like, I felt guilty. I'm weak. Screwed up. Yeah. I'm weak. I'm screwed up. The reality is that a lot of us have that because it just pops in. It's an intrusive thought. Yeah. It's like, well, if you don't want to feel this anymore, this is a way out. It's like, that's true, but it's not what I actually want to do. Yeah. So even being told that this is normal, it's like, wait, it's normal. Yeah. And then all of a sudden now they stop feeling that I have a problem. It's like, no, you don't. You're just human. Yeah. And that's the beauty in us having these conversations. So Ryan, thank you so much for coming on here today. This was an absolute joy. I'm so grateful for your vulnerability. And very quickly, where can people find you and get connected? And if they want to be a part of this, how do they do that?
Yeah. So social media handles are Ryan.Tomita.
Okay.
And then we're primarily on Instagram for Middle Finger Mantras,
Okay.
and just spelled out, no spaces.
Yep.
If you don't mind, I'd like to retouch on one of the points.
Absolutely.
Is that cool?
Yeah.
So I think there's something specific, and you and I being men, we have our own perspective of men's mental health.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a reason why I say brotherhood versus anyone.
Okay.
And that's because men specifically understand the struggles of other men.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I think that the process of finding a brotherhood helps you identify that I'm not broken. It is not me that is going through this. This is something that happens.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And being able to connect with other men who are willing to meet you with your vulnerability and express their struggles, and how you are not the only one that has failed in sports or feels worthless or is thinking about suicide, really helps to put in perspective that, like, okay, I'm not alone. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's not just me.
Yeah.
Like, this is just part of life. And so I think that's an important distinction. And I'd also say that women are typically a lot better at holding space, just because they're more empathetic and they understand that.
Mm-hmm.
And if a group of men, if you don't have a group of men, a female friend, not a girlfriend or a wife, a female friend would be my next suggestion on who to seek to be able to talk through these things.
Yeah.
But I just felt like that was somewhat incomplete on my attempt to give advice. But yeah, man, it's been a pleasure getting to know you. I'm so grateful that Kyle put us in contact. I think that's another expression of masculinity 2.0 is, Kyle seeing someone that he likes and another person that he thinks that people should meet. And he goes, I want to make this introduction.
Yeah.
I'm thankful that in the stage that you're at with, secluding yourself and spending more time with yourself and doing inner work, that you decided to take the leap and meet with me for coffee, and enjoyed your presence in the last couple of book clubs. Excited to witness your journey, because especially talking to you and being able to hear about the stuff that you've been processing through and avenues you've been exploring, I'm really excited for the growth that you're going to be going through.
Absolutely. I mean, we both know this, man. We're all stronger together than we are alone. So,
and a lot stronger with you on our team.
If we need anything physical, I can help with that. Or you'll find out that it's all air muscles. Yeah. That's what I tell people. It's just the SpongeBob air muscles. Don't think I'm here to save the day on the physical sense. But no, man, we have so many great days ahead of us, and so much more that we'll do and grow and impact many others that we cross paths with. So I'm really excited for what the future holds. Yeah. So thank you so much for coming today.
Much love. Appreciate you.